Okay. Well, I need to send this to my sister and my cousin.
So I'll post it on the Facebook group.
Yeah, they're not on Facebook, so.
Can you send me the link and I'll post it later?
Is this the dash?
Even I'll wait for your.
Okay. Okay, give me a second.
All right. So just go with this, man. I think it's
Share.
fine. One thing you could potentially do is if you turned a little bit, it would see that screen, but I wouldn't worry about that.
Copy.
All right. All right. So he's got it.
Hi there. Let me just post it on Facebook and send it to other people.
They wanted, that's right. It wasn't as if they need their stuff done. Yeah.
Yeah, that is one thing to say first.
All the way down.
There may be like 17 numbers.
That's on quiet.
Is possible to go?
I did not. Let me post that. I'll just email it to you and then you can post it to the group. Email post.
You did?
Want me to go ahead? Click on the thing.
I'm gonna unplug this. Are you gonna use this at all? No. Okay.
Okay, post it.
Okay, you did? Okay, there we go. Set, send it to my lab team.
It's working.
Okay, it's working now? Okay. Let me just post this to the lab people so it's the lab people in New York know what's going on. Sorry, there's a ton of people who are trying to see the live stream.
Testing's live and at least 2 people watching.
Okay, good.
Just don't accidentally close the YouTube window. YouTube window.
Okay. Yeah, maybe close the door and then people can slide in. As always, technical difficulties, which somehow is related to what I'm doing.
You need to work on it. Go ahead.
This will just take 1 second with the sending out the thing here. Link.
Is there anything I can help with?
Nope, I just got to send this to one more person so that my cousin tunes in and everything will be just good.
I may not have some beginning.
Okay. Now we just turn the lights down and we'll get the show going. I'm just going to turn the lights down a little.
Yeah, you turn them however you want them. That's good. These are really good screens. Yeah. Okay, that's good. So, you're all set?
All right.
So that's Dave Miller, and Dave has a lot of colleagues and friends, which is great to see. I'm Byron Reeves, and I'm the chair of Dave's dissertation committee, and I'll be moderating just the first part of that, and then our faculty will convene after Dave's presentation and your questions, and Sean, our guest, our outside department moderator, will take over then. But we'll spend the first approximately 20-25 minutes. Dave will present his work, and then the floor will be open for questions. You're welcome to ask him questions. At that point, anyone is, and I'll try to help moderate those questions, mostly looking at time, and I would say since we're starting about 5-7 minutes late here, by about 3:45, so 3:50, we'll want to make sure that we have enough time to adjourn quickly and then reconvene for the faculty. So, any questions before we start?
If you could put your phones on quiet mode, that would be nice.
Good for you.
I think he's good. He said him how he wanted it.
Oh, you did? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, Dave. If that's the way you want it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
Good.
Okay, David.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming from all kinds of faraway places and places maybe just inside the building. So, my dissertation topic is human-computer moral conflicts, which is becoming an ever more present threat as we have more and more things with independent agency that are computational agents. So people have Amazon Echo on their coffee table, or an agent in the phone in their pocket, or even wearable devices that have some sort of an agency that can influence the information that we see. They can be persuasive, be potentially coercive. And so we need to start thinking about what kind of conflicts are we going to have with these various agents. And if you have a conflict with your Amazon agent, you might get the wrong product, but think about what might happen if you have a conflict with the computer that's flying the plane or helping to drive your car. Time might be short, you can't negotiate forever, and you might die, or someone else might. So we need to start thinking about how are we going to design these systems to negotiate, or find out how are people going to behave in these situations as we get more conflicts. So if we think about Amazon, so I go and I put in rechargeable batteries, and all of the things on the top row are sponsored products or the things that they want me to buy, not necessarily what I'm looking for. But I can go and scroll down and find the ones that are editorially recommended, and my personal favorite here, they actually work. So we can have a conflict with these kinds of systems and negotiate it because we have plenty of time and we're in the safety of our kitchen. But what happens when we have a situation in driving? So we build systems that are now able to go and step in when we have an error. So automated emergency braking. The computer jams on the brakes if you don't. It's there to go and save you from your own inattention or save you from yourself. But sometimes you have to supervise the computer because it could be an error. And this is a reenactment of a crash that occurred near here with fatal results. So the driver needed to go and step in and keep the car from following the stripes right into a concrete barrier. So we need to design these systems to deal with these kinds of problems. But all of these have rather pat, objectively correct or incorrect decisions. But a moral conflict does not. Different moral theories would give you a different optimal answer to Foote's trolley dilemma or things that are similar. So if we think about this situation, Batman would say, being a deontologist, he has a rule, and his rule is that he will not kill, but he doesn't have a problem with letting people die. So he goes and says, I'm going to keep my hands off that switch lever, and the train's going to roll straight down the track and strike these 5 people. But Spock, as he would say, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. He's going to go push the lever and put the train on the alternate track, save the 5 people, but actually kill 1 person. And then my lawyer might have something to say about that. So to look at this kind of a problem, people go and have conducted a lot of survey research. So one of the earlier studies by Bertram Molley's group at Brown, they did a survey study and they said, what do you want a human to do, or what do you want a robot to do in a trolley dilemma type problem? And people want the robot to act in a more utilitarian manner than they would want a human operator. So when they say morally wrong, it's morally wrong for the computer to switch the track more than it's morally wrong for the robot to do it. And a much larger survey study, this was out of MIT with the MIT Moral Machine. They had several million respondents and about 40 million individual question responses. And they get a paradoxical result. People want their own car, their own agent to have a duty to them and to protect them, but they want everyone's car, which would presumably include their own, to protect the most vulnerable. And that's a logical impossibility. I can't be selfish and still selfless at the same time. So that presents a conundrum even in situations where people are sitting at home in the comfort of their couch and making these choices and saying, this is what I want my agent to do, or I want everyone's agent to do. But we should go and find out, what do people actually do in these kinds of situations? So we can use virtual reality to go and place people in these kinds of situations and see what do they actually do. So one of the earliest studies using virtual reality was an examination manipulating presence. So people either have a desktop-sized VR system or a cave where they're sort of in a larger environment. And being in a larger environment encourages more utilitarian choices as you're more present. But this study is rather limited in that the mundane realism is low, and it's third-person framing. So you are not actually getting shot at by this stick figure. You are sitting outside of it. You are operating this elevator where they can go up and shoot 5 people or go down and shoot 1. So that one's somewhat limited, but in the intervening years, we've had much more sophisticated VR simulations. So this is a driving simulation by Wintersberger's group, and they have a full vehicle driving simulator, even more advanced than the one that we have here at Stanford. It's on a gimbal and it moves and pitches and rolls. But theirs is limited in that they stop time. So you're driving down the road and time stops and this window appears and you get a discrete probability of you survive but the child will die, or your chance of survival is 25%. So you can sit here and be like, I'm sitting in a driving simulator and there's that crafty experimenter over there is watching me. What makes me look like a good person? What ought I to do? I'm going to pick A or B, and then time will resume and we'll go on to the next gate. So the problem with this is we're measuring, again, what do people want as opposed to what would they actually do in an ecologically similar situation. So to look at that, I conducted my own study to look at this. So we wanted to go and see what do people do in this kind of situation under realistic time pressure situations with a first person situation. So we go and we built this in the driving simulator, and people have this tunnel dilemma. I don't know if Jason Millar is watching. There's a tunnel dilemma, which is similar to a trolley dilemma. And this is asymmetric in that these are water-filled plastic barrels and a hapless construction worker. So in one case, you would injure yourself, and in the other case, someone would die. And we go and we give you 1 second, 4 seconds, or 8 seconds, and we see what do people do. And this is what it looks like from the first person view as you're driving in this construction site. This is not my dissertation. This is a pilot study. And so people go and they have this this experience, and what happens is most people actually they get stuck. They jam on the brakes, but they don't make a decision of what to do, which puts them in a suboptimal position where they hit both the barrier and the worker. So with 1 second, which is really not enough time to do much of anything, most people hit both. With 4 seconds, which is a reasonable amount of time in a driving context, still 50% of the people hit both. And if we increase that to 8 seconds, which is an unrealistically long amount of time for a driving type situation, still we have nearly 50% still hitting both. So that helps us to set the amount of time that we would want to look at, and kind of makes it seem necessary, at least to me, that a computer should step in if you're not going to, especially when we ask people retrospectively afterward, what ought you have done? And everyone says, I should have hit the barrier. And their actions in virtual reality do not reflect their ought. So what happens if the computer executes your ought? Will you fight against it? So we want to, this sets up our research questions of, do people fight against the computer effectively when it is doing the opposite of what you want? And how does the amount of time and the perceived threat influence that behavior in a high presence simulation? And how do their stated preferences? So if you get to go and have a little slider to decide how selfish or altruistic do you want your agent or your car to be, as a way to say how selfish or altruistic are you, how does that influence your actual behavior when you fight against the computer or not? So for this, we have 3 major independent variables. So we have this survey measure. What do people say they want their system to be configured to do? So they have a 1 to 100 slider. You can set it from maximum protect the vulnerable to maximum protect me, or somewhere in the middle. We randomly assign people to experimental conditions. The system is either configured to protect the vulnerable or configured to protect the vehicle occupants, and the participants are briefed both in writing and when they get into the simulator. The system is configured to do one of these or these 2 things. And because this is a repeated measures design, people go and they experience multiple experiences. There's a set of varied situations. 8 have no conflict, so we can see what do people do when the computer just pushes them away from some threat or to them or a threat to someone else. 8 low conflict situations where it's not possible to actually hit anything. And 1 critical conflict where it is inevitable that you will hit something. There's no way out of that one. So looking from our magic top view, this is what happens in one of the low conflict situations. So there's this tanker truck full of gasoline parked on that side of the road, and there's a person standing here. Just a pylon because that's the way the software works when you're looking at it. And your computer nudges you either closer to this truck or a little closer to this person and further from the truck. And we see how much do people turn the steering wheel to change their path. And then this critical conflict situation, and there's only one because you can only really crash your car once, even in virtual reality without breaking down on presence. And the people, they drive through this situation, and there's a construction worker on one side, a set of plastic barrels on the other, and they're hemmed in with these concrete barriers. So they have to hit one of these things or both. And we activate the fog to go and give them a fixed visibility of 3 seconds at the appropriate highway speed. And we see what happens, how much do people fight against the computer when it is either pushing people one way or the other. And this is what it looks like when they're in the driving simulator. So you get a face view of participant. This is an over shoulder view. You can see out the windshield here. This is the front view. So this is what they see on the front screen of that big 270-degree curved arc. And we have our magic helicopter, which also has no fog. So we get to go and see their vehicle moving and see everything nicely from that view. So for this participant, the system is configured to protect the vehicle occupant and will push them away from threats to them and potentially towards people. So this is a practice trial where the computer will help them to change lanes. There's 2 of these and they're not scored. So this is a non-conflict event. The computer just pushes them a little bit further from the postman. And it will push them a little bit further from the snowplow, and the driver is controlling the speed. The computer is not activating the brakes in the low conflict situations. So this is a low conflict situation, and it has nudged her, the driver, towards the pedestrian and a little further from the snowplow. So there's 16 of these events, and now we're approaching the critical conflict area, which is in this construction zone. I would like to thank my friend, the visiting professor, who stars in this video. So you can see that she is showing quite extreme stress or emotion at that moment, but she is not actually pushing hard against the system to change its trajectory. So when we start to look at the results, we have a slight difference between randomly assigned groups in what people set on the slider. What do people say they want their agent to do? So, but most of the people are setting it to exactly 50. So people want to have their cake and eat it too. They want their system to both protect the vulnerable and to protect them, which kind of doesn't really work because we have to make hard decisions sometimes. And we treated that as another measure, and it turns out that this is not a significant determinant of behavior when we put it in our model. When we look at the torque people exert in the 8 low conflict events, the parameters of each of the events seems to be the largest part. So when you're being pushed towards the snowplow, people steer against it pretty hard. But if you're getting steered a little bit closer to the pointy end of a fallen tree, people don't really exert that much force on it. So there's a difference in that also may be somewhat determined by, by the parameters of exactly where we set the target points in the simulation for how far do they move in lateral space across the road. So there's a significant main effect for that system orientation, that whether it's configured to protect you or configured to protect the vulnerable. But the individual trials, this difference is not overall significant, but there's a significant interaction effect. I have an error on my slide, of course. But so that's what happens in the multiple trials. Then when we come to the critical conflict trial, there is a statistically significant difference in the torque people exert against the steering system, depending on whether it's steering them towards the worker or steering them towards the barrier. People fight harder against the system that is steering them towards the unprotected worker than when it's steering them towards that plastic barrier. But the difference is relatively small. The system can exert up to 5 Newton meters of torque on the steering system, and the most anyone actually exerts is 1.6. And when we look at the trajectories plot, so this is looking down from the ceiling, we can see that people, for the most part, they go where the system pushes them to go. And while there is variation in the starting points, all but one of these paths goes in the direction that the computer has determined that they will go in. One person out of 64 actually changes their trajectory and fights against the computer hard enough to go and hit the barrier instead of hitting the worker. There are a number of people who actually end up being pushed into the middle or fighting enough to put themselves in the middle, and that actually makes it more dangerous to the worker and to them, because if you have an offset collision, there's less of the front of your car to absorb that energy. So that's certainly not a situation that you actually want to be in. So when we look at the results in summary, do people fight against the computer effectively? It's dependent upon the time available. So in the low conflict trials, people can go and slow themselves down or even stop and evaluate what's going on and then push as hard as they feel they need to. But when time is limited, their ability to fight against the computer is also limited. So the time pressure reduces their ability to fight, and the threat, so something like a snowplow, which is more threatening than the tufty end of a fallen tree, that requires less of a fight. You're just going to go and drive over the pine needles. And they're perceived, what they think about when they're sitting in the lobby, setting how they want their agent to be configured. If they were thinking about this as a future thing and not necessarily knowing what's in store for them because they're blind to the experimental conditions, their state of preferences are not indicative of their actual behavior in virtual reality. So this has a set of far-reaching conclusions in a psychological frame. So we get a behavioral measure of people's actual actions that is unfiltered by social desirability bias or what they really want other people to think. People are behaving as if it's real before they can suppress that non-conscious behavior. So we're not necessarily looking into their mind as if we had neuroimaging. We're looking at what are they going to do before they can do something that is socially acceptable or what they would match with their ought. And this could be used in other areas. So we can look at customer preferences or other things in human-computer interaction and I'm sure that you can think of plenty of things where it's like, oh, I really want to know what people are going to do in this situation as opposed to what they say they want. And of course, there's plenty of engineers in the room. We have to think about the engineering conclusions in that, what are we going to design these systems to do? Because there are people not too far away who are actually building and testing these systems, and they're going to have to deal with designing a mechanism to deal with both no-win situations and with human-computer conflicts. Because what do we, should the system just say, hey, you the driver are always in charge, or you the driver are, when it really comes down to it, I'm just going to grab the wheel away from you. It doesn't matter that you own the car and are inside it. So we have quite a lot of debate to have in how do we start designing those things. And one of the things that I would like to think about in that vein is maybe we need to have a situational system. The system needs to know, are you going to make a good decision, or is it going to make a good decision? And not just overrule you or let you overrule it without any assessment of the environment or your decision-making capabilities. And I would like to thank quite a lot of people, some who couldn't be here. So my father in this ridiculous jacket from 1969, the rest of my family who couldn't make it, but my mother and my aunt are here. My aunt and uncle and my sister are on the live stream. My grandparents, one who I guess is probably not watching at home, but she'll watch it later. And I'd like to thank the cycling team, a whole bunch of whom are here. The people from CDR who are mostly here, who've done a lot of work, and includes David Sirkin and Wendy, who have been really helpful in developing this research over the past several years. My friends who have come from all over the place, and I would like to thank my committee, and would like to also recognize Cliff Nass, who hired me into Stanford to get all this research started. And with that, I would like to open it up to the floor for questions. So.
How, as a consumer, how would you choose the car that has an AI that does match your cultural values?
That is a very big conundrum. So the MIT Moral Machine study, they in their second paper that's in Nature, they surveyed people from all over the world. They had about 40 million individual question responses from 2.5 million respondents, and they actually divide the responses into 3 regions. So a Western region, a Southern region, so South America, Africa and Middle East, and an Eastern region of mostly East Asia and some South Asia. And certainly if you add in parameters of who the victims may be, there's quite a big difference in what people want their agent to do. And that's an issue. Like, somebody's going to have to decide whether it's the International Standards Organization or national organizations, or the public somehow, or even do people get a little switch of what do they want their agent to do? Should we want all the cars to operate the same way? Would that have a persuasive influence against these cultural differences right now? If all the cars behave this way, will people start to behave the same way that we set all of the agents to behave? So there's not an answer, there just is another question.
There's a bit depends on one question actually, but you have a usage exploitation. When you drive, let's say that you have your baby sitting at back, and how they want your car to behave event. But when you are kind of targeted somewhere, or maybe you already have it, but for the agent, but for ourselves, it's very interesting. We will have future the programmable agents very fine.
So right now, we obviously can change the way that we behave when we're driving, and we can to some degree influence things like following distance with adaptive cruise control. But debate rages also in this area of, do we give people the ability to set this? Does it influence their insurance premiums or who's liable? Or do we say, all right, we're just going to set the rule and all of the vehicles are going to behave this way. And if you're in a hurry, you're just going to have to wait. And if you want to go slower than the minimum, well, it's just going to drive you at its speed, or it's going to push you up to the safe minimum highway speed. So, and in terms of these kinds of things, there have been some debates and only a few decisions made about what do we set these systems to do. So in Germany, they made a law where you can't go and have variation. The US has yet to go and make any legislation in this way to say like, oh, we're going to preference a young person over an old person, or an old person over a young person, or more people over fewer people. That remains to be seen, and the law is going to have to make those decisions, or the courts are going to make those decisions, or people in cubicles are going to first make the decisions, and then it'll circle around. Yes. So some of that is going to be from training data that is artificially constructed. So I believe it's Zoox. They've created an artificial simulated San Francisco and have artificial simulated cars driving around in their computers. Whatever they put in that model is what their system is going to be trained to do. Waymo, Cruise, your real companies that are driving around in the real world, they're training on what's in their environment. And some of those things, like if we think about the crash of Uber's test vehicle, it was not programmed with an ability to evaluate a person not being at a crosswalk, and so in the space of 5 seconds reclassified a person pushing their bicycle as 3 or 4 different things and did not plot a trajectory, and therefore it's like it was only less than 1 second before impact that the computer provided any alert to the supervisor, who was also distracted, and therefore there was a fatal crash. So we need to go and say, we need to build it into our system in saying like, people are just going to be in random places. There are cows, chickens, tumbleweeds, you name the item, it'll be there. It's an open set in the real world. But then also we've got these things when we're training, a smaller person, so a child will have a smaller radar reflection or a smaller image on a camera than a larger person. The favorite that I've trot out is one time I took a dive while riding my bike. And so I'm lying on the road and actually sliding across it. How is the computer going to recognize something that it's never been trained on and may just get washed out as a ground return? I kind of don't want to get run over, but when somebody at car companies, I'm looking at a couple people here, need to take that into account, because these things happen, but if you're not anticipating it, it's not going to be in your training set, and you're not going to see it. Yep.
Did you do any sort of survey with the participants afterwards? Did they have that life-changing moment during the virtual?
I don't think anybody said that they had a life-changing moment in this, but people, they said, yeah, I mean, they were like, I felt very present. So that the presence scores on the scale of presence questionnaire, people do say that they felt very much in this environment and acted as though it was real. When we look at their heart rate and conductivity to measure autonomic arousal, almost everybody has a big spike when they go and hit something. I have to look at the data, but I mean, people go and they write and they say like this really felt real, and they kind of wish that they had made different choices, but in the moment they act, but they don't have the ability to exert that conscious supervisory control even of themselves to go and change their behavior.
So do you think there's like a theoretical limit on the speed that people can make decisions under high stress, and also a theoretical limit on the algorithms and the actually give you the right amount of like time to react? What when we do it in 1 second, is it possible to process it?
So if I had a drop stick and I tested everybody here, it would probably be your simple reaction time is about 2 to 3/10 of a second for a simple, like, just grab this thing as soon as I drop it. 1 second to do any sort of complicated thing is probably too short. And the more processing that you have to do, the more time you need to do it. And then if you add in other things, like you're focused on some other task or media or whatever it might be, that just goes way up. Our lab, looking at Dr. Mock and Dr. Johns, have done some work on that in terms of task switching, and you really need several seconds, 4 or 5 seconds for task switching. For a moral decision like this, I'm pushing down as far as I can with the 3 to 4 second range to go and reduce your ability to exert much conscious control. So because I'm trying to go and look at what do people do when they have the absolute minimum amount of time to think about the situation, think about the fact that they're in a simulator, and react as though they know that I'm watching. Yes. So that is, it's a validity trade. So in real life, something that is big and plastic and bright orange is going to be more visible than a construction worker, even if they're wearing high visibility clothing. And so yes, I lose a little bit of experimental validity, but I'm increasing the ecological validity because this is how it would happen in real life. And people go and the people who go in the pilot study, they go and they say, oh, I turned this way and I didn't notice, and then all of a sudden, like, saw the worker, and after I'd already hit him, or I like just turned away from this big orange thing. We actually did a lot of testing of how big should we make the barrier, because if it's too scary, nobody hits it. If it's too short, everybody hits it. We needed to get it just right so that some people will hit it and some people won't. One more, so, Becky. Yeah. Hi. No, so we tried several different personality measures, and none of those found any differences in the population. So it's basically flat across when we look at the personality measures that we tried to go and evaluate. there just wasn't any variation, so no variation, and you can't see anything with their behavior. We did not see a gender difference, and I guess we could have measured strength, but the 2 Newton meters with the diameter of the steering wheel is, we tested it to go and see, like, does this feel realistic? If you were working at a car company, is this the amount of resistance that you would expect from a steering system that's trying to go and steer you, but you can still overpower it? So it's a valid question, but we didn't see that and didn't necessarily go looking for it in the most systematic way, but I think that we pretty much covered that question. All right. All right.
So we'll take a quick couple of minutes.
Grab some things on the area.
Video is good. Video is great. I got it.
Good.
I got it.
All right.
Every time I watch the video, I get confused. You know, I home in the wrong frame.
Oh, your AR? Oh, lower area. Oh, you're seeing it over from there. Got it. Was the space.
What are we looking for? I think you did tell me.
Yeah. Generally, it's like okay. So we generally kind of go down the line, but we did. I know it's right. Basically, yes. Yeah. I'll go with that. Or not at all. So in the time,
and in fact, if I don't use it,